Welcome to this episode of Equity Mates Investing Podcast. Today we're doing a deep dive on Eli Lilly. If you enjoy this content, make sure you subscribe.
All right, Ren, well, where do you want to begin?
For Eli Lilly, they had the not so conspicuous honor of having the largest individual corporate fine in US history.
Really?
Yeah. And then I was like, I wanted to
Bigger than the other pharmaceutical
you're
company,
thinking of Purdue. No, but Purdue was later. So this was in 2009.
Okay.
And then I went to the Wikipedia page, list of largest pharmaceutical settlements, and it just makes you sad, to be honest.
Why? Because there's so many.
Yeah.
I hate it.
Anyway, Eli Lilly.
Just get away with it. Anyway, yeah, very positive way to start.
Eli Lilly, it is a pharmaceutical company developing and manufacturing medications across a variety of therapeutic areas. I think their tagline is something like, we're a medicine company.
Nice.
Yeah.
Good one. Make it explicit.
Yeah, it's just a medicine company.
I mean, it's to the point.
All right, so let's go back in history.
Yes.
Eli Lilly started in 1876.
Yeah.
Here's a bit of trivia for you. Who was Eli Lilly?
A general.
A general, yes. No, he was a colonel.
Oh.
Colonel Eli Lilly was a veteran of the Civil War, fighting on the good side, the Union side, and a pharmaceutical chemist.
Yeah.
He then created Eli Lilly and Company after the Civil War. One of the first drugs he produced was quinine, which is a drug used to treat malaria. Here's how Eli Lilly and Company made their name for themselves. One of their first innovations was a gelatin coating for pills and capsules.
Nailed it.
Some of the company's other early innovations include fruit flavorings, still used today,
Absolutely.
and sugar-coated pills, which made the medicines easier to swallow.
Genius.
Over the years, they were the first company to mass produce the polio vaccine. Didn't create it, but first company to mass produce it. They were also the first company to mass produce insulin. So if we take a step back, there's this theory in pharmaceuticals that the US subsidizes the rest of the world because the US seems to be the only developed nation that doesn't negotiate drug prices with pharmaceutical companies. You know, Australia, we have the PBS. In the UK, they have the NHS. In Europe, they have government price caps and controls on pharmaceuticals. But in the US, it's a free-for-all. It's a messy insurance and HMO free-for-all. But there's this theory that the US pay overs so the rest of the world can pay unders.
Why? So the companies...
Well, that's just what people argue. But my argument is just if the US government also negotiate, what's going to suffer is pharmaceuticals profit margins. Yeah. Anyway.
Unbelievable.
But
some of the theories out there.
But insulin in the US was so expensive. And so whether you like him or whether you hate him, one good thing that Biden has done is capped the price of insulin to $35 a month for a lot of Americans. That has affected Eli Lilly. But it has also positively affected millions of American lives.
Oh, come on.
Yeah.
So Eli Lilly today, they have products sold around 125 countries. Some of their big drugs that they're known for, so they have a clinical depression drug called Prozac and Cymbalta, and an antipsychotic medication called Zyprexa. Primary revenue drivers are the diabetes drugs Humalog and Trulicity. Be a great job coming up with the names. But obviously the reason that we have spoken about it as part of my bold predictions, and they're in the news of late as well, is because of the GLP-1 weight loss space. They're a big player. They have Mounjaro and Zepbound. And they also make Cialis.
I think the thing to know about Eli Lilly is it is a stupidly big pharmaceutical company. I clipped one image from their Q1 earnings report, which is not something that translates on a podcast, but imagine just like size 10 font, all text, just update after update after update, regulatory updates. We got approval for this. We got approval for this in America, in Europe, and then clinical updates. We're at stage 3 of this for this. instance and stage 2 at this, and you know we presented this and this. So it's just huge.
Yeah.
And I think when we get to talking about the weight loss drugs, that's something to keep in mind. That you're not getting pure play exposure to any one drug. You're getting diversified exposure to like the overall global medicine spend.
Yeah.
One thing they did have in this slide though is in the other section, a few notes that are relevant to the conversation we're having today. So the first note, announced price reductions of 70% for Lilly's most commonly prescribed insulins, as an expansion of the insulin value program that caps patient out-of-pocket costs at $35 or less a month. So that is the government proving that they can cap pharmaceutical prices. Hopefully,
And
more
just
to
to be
come.
clear, that's not the government subsidizing.
No, I don't think this one is. I think it's just a law I think it capped it for Medicare enrollees.
But here in Australia, that is how it works, isn't it?
Sort of. So the government give us a subsidy, like subsidized. So it's like, what, $30 if you don't have a concession card, and like $6 if you do, or something like that. But then the government also use their negotiating leverage to say, if you want to be on the PBS,
Reduce it.
we're going to negotiate price.
Gotcha.
So the government,
Gotcha. So
it's not like
it's
they,
both.
the government aren't price takers,
Yeah.
because pharmaceutical companies want to be on the PBS because they're more likely to get prescribed and, you know, all of that stuff. So then they negotiate with the government on price, but there is some subsidy involved.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
So that was the first thing in the other section that I thought was relevant to draw out.
Yep.
The other one was announced an additional $1.6 billion investment in Eli Lilly's 2 new manufacturing sites in Indiana, bringing the total commitment to $3.7 billion. No prizes for guessing what they're trying to manufacture more of. GLP-1 drugs, weight loss drugs.
Yeah. To the conversation on who's going to be the big companies that knocks off the tech guys in the next decade, could be these guys.
You've been saying that.
Yeah.
You've started the year. You said Novo and Eli Lilly.
I don't think they'll knock them off this year, but I'm fascinated by thinking about who is going to be. You know, this conversation we have about, you know, the indexes always roll through, and there's always bigger companies coming through. You put a post up on Instagram about the impact that GLP-1 drugs could have on Americans, and the I guess penetration across society.
Yeah, Morgan Stanley estimate 9% of Americans, so 31.5 million people, will be using them by 2035.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
Far out. And the benefit to these companies, obviously there's going to be more and more competition, but these big guys are the ones that are taking it at the moment.
Yeah. That Morgan Stanley, even in their wildest estimates think it's going to be like $150 billion a year business.
Right.
And it's like Amazon make $150 billion in revenue in a quarter. Yeah. You know, Apple's doing $110 billion buyback. But it's just like the scale that we're talking is still, Yeah,
but imagine if it's 50% of the population that start to...
Well, yeah. Well, imagine if it's 100% of the population. And imagine if we all smash our iPhones. Then they'll definitely be bigger than Apple. All right, let's get to the financials.
Let's keep going through. Yeah. Financials. So it's a profitable company, Ren, but let's have a look at the revenues first. They sort of hover around, the $20 billion mark. Most recently, though, they're up in the 30s. So we'll go for the past 4 years from 2020 during COVID. $25 billion in revenue, $28 billion, and then $34 billion. So I'm guessing that the last year is reflective of the work that's being done in the GLP-1 space, revenue growth of 20% in 2023. That hasn't come through to the profit line, though. The profit line, 2020, they did about $6 billion in profit. Same in 2021, about $5.5 billion. $6 billion in 2022, and then back down to just over $5 billion in 2023.
Yeah, I think if you look at their margin, their profit margin from 2019 to 2023, you can sort of see a story playing out. 37%, 25%, 20%, 22%, 15%. So a big reason for the revenue going up, as you mentioned, was the weight loss drugs. A big reason for the profit coming down is
R&D.
No, the insulin price reduction that we've spoken
Oh,
about.
that's significant.
No, well, it would be part of it.
Yeah.
There's no doubt that this is a profitable company that has people that are lifelong users of its drugs that will keep doing its thing. The question about whether what it can be is it had a great year last year and it grew 20%, revenue 20%.
Yeah.
And its profit margin is 15%. Like that's not the profile of we're coming for the tech giants.
Number one.
Yeah.
Yeah, true.
But it's massive. If we talk about the future, I think they've got a pretty future-facing clinical pipeline. So obviously GLP-1 is spoken about a lot. They also they bought a company that does that super targeted cancer identification and treatment.
Yeah, like
similar to Telix. Yeah. And so they're playing in a lot of interesting spaces. They're also playing in a lot of rote but valuable spaces in terms of improving people's quality of life. That's the dichotomy of pharmaceutical companies. Like, for all the reasons that we might dislike them, you can make a pretty strong argument that they've been a net positive to society.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But let's talk about the future. So as I said, massive clinical pipeline. If you're going to invest in it, you want to understand the full pipeline. You wouldn't. People definitely have, but I would warn against investing in Eli Lilly just because GLP-1.
Yeah.
Because I would make the argument right now that it will never be a majority of their earnings, just because of how diversified they are.
So big.
Yeah. So that's probably the first one. Understand their full clinical pipeline, and we'll speak to Michael Frazis a bit about where that pipeline is going. But then the other thing around their future is there is only going to be more pressure on cost. Like, the US healthcare system is a mess, and it is going to get sorted out at some point in some way. It has to. Like,
Well, it does, but will it?
It has to.
Yeah, we've been saying that for 20 years.
It might break before it gets fixed, but it has to.
So many things have to.
But in the meantime, there's going to be these pushes like the $35 insulin, but also there will be new business models that come to market. Have you seen this Mark Cuban cost plus drugs stuff?
I've heard of it, but I'm not really familiar.
It's pretty epic. I seriously respect what he's doing. It's basically like any drug that is off patent, they're manufacturing themselves, and then they're selling it at the cost of manufacturing plus 15%. And it is just massively undercutting everyone. The challenge for a lot of Americans is that they get health insurance through their work.
Yeah.
And this Mark Cuban's company isn't on a lot of insurance, so you've got to pay out of pocket. But it's just like, it's pretty amazing. Like, you read some of the testimonials and some of the stories about what people were paying out of pocket and then what they are paying out of pocket now. And it's pretty cool.
Wow. And
so I think while there's political intransigence, there'll be more and more business model disruption as well. Like, we had that Berkshire Hathaway, JP Morgan, Amazon tie-up that didn't go anywhere. Yeah. Like, people are going to try things just because for companies it's so expensive. We talked about Microsoft buying a nuclear reactor because it's going to be cheaper for them with their energy needs. Well, they think it might be cheaper for them. A lot of companies could save a lot of money sorting some healthcare stuff out.
Yeah,
and as they get bigger.
True.
Yeah. Anyway, that's a whole separate issue.
That's probably a great place to leave it, Ren. Looking forward to picking this up with Michael Frazis.
Welcome back to Equity Mates. We are here doing a deep dive on Eli Lilly, and it is our absolute pleasure to welcome back to Equity Mates, Michael Frazis, Portfolio Manager at Frazis Capital. Michael, welcome.
Thank you, guys. Good to be back on.
Yes, it's been a while. 2021, top of the bull run, I think was when, when we last had you. Yeah. So we're keen to get you on to discuss Eli Lilly, given the experience you have in understanding and analysing these companies. And I think that's where we want to start, because before the break, Alec and I had a bit of fun with the amount of different names and drugs that are in the pipeline for Eli Lilly. And this isn't just a pure play for GLP-1 that we'll get to in a second. So when analysing such a, conglomerate of a pharmaceuticals company, What are the things you're looking for, and help us understand how you actually analyze a company?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the simplest way is to go drug by drug and opportunity by opportunity. There's some instances, like Eli Lilly, which is a huge company now. There's only a few things that are going to move the needle, and they're going to move the needle a lot. So in this case, you probably can just focus on like the leading franchises that they're developing and try and figure out where they sit. They've obviously got their obesity franchise. They've got a really interesting drug coming out, which is donanemab, which is for Alzheimer's. So I think that might be underestimated. It's probably the first one that's shown a real improvement in people with kind of early stage and mid stage Alzheimer's. So I think that could be underestimated. And I think what you're really looking for is which of these drugs can kind of outperform, and which of these drugs is there a market opportunity that's significantly bigger than what's the market expecting. I think that's especially the case with Eli Lilly. It's had a huge run. It's one of the most valuable companies in the world. So you're really going to need to see something that moves the needle in either direction to take, a conviction view that the market's got it wrong and you won't have it right.
Well, so it's about a 700 billion market cap now. Bryce reckons it's going to be over $1 trillion by the end of the year. Bryce, who has no expertise in analysing pharmaceutical companies.
I should point out.
Yeah.
So when you're looking drug by drug, and you mentioned the Alzheimer's drug there, GLP-1 drugs, how do you analyse those opportunities? What are you looking? I mean, you've got a science background, so you're probably looking at the clinical data. But for those of us that are a little bit less familiar with all of that, where should we look to sort of assess? There might be something here that's interesting, or there's not much here.
Yeah, you need to kind of get an estimate of the peak sales. Like, how much can this drug make? And then obviously you've got a patent life you have to consider. Generally you can find, I guess, for a retail investor, all that stuff is generally online. You'll be able to find estimates drug by drug. You probably only focus on the ones that are kind of relatively late stage. So that you do have high conviction that they work and they're going to succeed.
And so it's late stage phase 3 clinical trials, is that?
Yeah. And something like Eli Lilly, the bulk of it's in its existing franchises and existing opportunities. It's unlikely that, promising phase 1 trial is really going to move the needle for them. It can happen, but, on their scale, it's unlikely. And in fact, Eli Lilly is probably going to be, or is making a lot of acquisitions in the space. They're using their immense GLP-1, GLP-1 revenues and profits to kind of acquire a bunch of companies. So that's also something to look at.
Yeah. We were speaking to someone last year, and Eli Lilly came up because they also had acquired a company that's similar to Telix here in Australia, like that targeted cancer drug.
Yeah. Well, Clarity Pharmaceuticals is our second biggest position. So that's in that radiopharmaceutical space as well. There's been a huge M&A wave there.
Yeah.
But it's kind of, nobody has purchased Telix yet. And I probably don't think they will. Because the interest in that space is all in treatments and therapeutics, whereas Telix is predominantly a diagnostic. Yeah, but that's pretty interesting. I mean, one thing you don't realize about Telix, it's actually a generic. So
it doesn't have a patent. No.
Doesn't have a patent. No. There's one radiotherapy that's approved for prostate cancer, and that's Novartis's Pluvicto. And when they got Pluvicto approved, they needed a companion diagnostic to figure out who was going to do it. And Telix was the one they chose. But when they got it approved, they also got their own companion diagnostic, which is effectively the same, approved at the same time. So that could be a huge value inflection point, because had Novartis chosen to market that, they would have probably, Telix would be a very different company today, much smaller. But all the big pharmas have basically said, we don't want diagnostics. We're in the business of treating disease, not doing the diagnostics. They kind of let Telix have the market. Presumably they did it as a backup just in case something went wrong, because part of the approval was that it had to be done with that particular diagnostic. But yeah, that's an interesting
Why
aspect.
don't farmers want to be in the diagnostic?
That's a good question. I think they're tough businesses. I think there's 2 generics, for example, in that market, prostate cancer. So do you really want to compete in that, or do you want to try and get a drug that has patent life that you can extend, that your doctor network can market? But it's really interesting because you often don't, I think these companies have so many things that they could do, even the largest companies like Eli Lilly, and they'll generally pick a few things that they're going to focus on and often just ignore the rest. And so you see it a bit in the ASX market, in the biotech market, where there's this idea that, when a drug's approved, it's going to be bought out by someone. But that might not be the case. Why would they buy that out? Do they have the existing doctor network? Do you have the sales team that can market that, an existing franchise in that space? Does it fit in with their strategic goals? All those things become really relevant. But you wouldn't know that unless you're kind of really dark, because the companies won't market that.
Yeah.
They'll just be like, we're going to get this, we're funded to phase 3, and then beyond that point, it's kind of a bit vague.
Yeah. We have spoken to a company recently who almost to a T said exactly that. So good to know that that's a bit of a red flag.
I think the questions you asked then are kind of like, who do you think will be a likely acquirer? Who has existing franchises in the space? Because what the big pharma want to do is they want to use their existing kind of sales team. So if they have a sales team in, a particular cancer or like eye doctors or whatever it is, if you've got something there that they can just plug in, then it probably does make good sense for them. But if you're expecting them to go hire a whole new sales team in a new area, or if it's in an area like diagnostics where they've explicitly said they're not interested, then it's pretty unlikely to happen.
Yeah, Eli Lilly not interested because their tagline is a medicine company.
Yeah.
One of the most uninspiring taglines out there.
Very literal.
Yeah, I like that. It's good.
So we want to talk about, I guess, like the bull case and the bear case, and what the divergent outcomes could be for a company like Eli Lilly. So let's start on the bull case, the positive side. What would have to go right, and what would the thesis be for Eli Lilly? And I guess, what's the probability that Bryce is right, that it reaches $1 billion this year?
Well, that means it'll be up probably 100%.
Yeah.
Look, it's possible. I think there's two things. It's going to be driven by the obesity franchise, almost certainly. Like, that's forecast to dramatically increase. There's still only like 5 or 6 million people in the US on it, I think. But, the bull case is that gets up to 40 mil plus. And that would be the similar number of people that are on statins, for high cholesterol, where something like 39, 40 million people, actually maybe it's a bit less, 38 million people are on those, which is a big chunk of the people over 40. That's a very likely outcome for GLP-1s. So I think you need to get comfortable in the GLP-1 case, and then you need to think, well, who's going to win that? Is it going to be Eli Lilly, or is it going to be someone else? And the example that we were just chatting about before is Lipitor and statins. It was, I think, the fifth or sixth drug to market, and they ended up winning it. And they built Pfizer's fortune on the back of that. And I think something pretty similar will happen in GLP-1s, where the ones in the market now aren't going to be the ones that make the most money. So even if you're right about where the market is in 5-10 years, and I'm definitely on the more bullish side of that, you still need to, it's not entirely clear who will have the best drug.
Why is that though? Like, is it because the drug is different, or like the early guys just haven't captured enough market share? Like, how can the sixth come in and just...
Typically you learn more about it, and then they improve generation by generation. So what was the history here? This stuff was discovered ages ago. The proof of concept was in the 90s. It was known in the late 80s. But the first drugs kind of didn't stick around long enough. Like natural GLP-1 kind of vanishes really quickly in the body. The first drugs you had to inject every day, or even multiple times a day.
Right.
Which obviously makes it only helpful for the most, very sick people with diabetes. And then they got it to like once daily and then weekly. And then they started learning actually this having a pretty strong effect on obesity as well. And then they had to do a bunch of studies on that. And now the next generation is, okay, there's GLP-1s, there's also GIP and glucagon. So you can actually have a double agonist or a triple agonist. So relevant to Eli Lilly got the first double agonist on, and that's Mounjaro, which I haven't actually seen in Australia. It doesn't seem to be talked about. You hear the conversation with Ozempic. But Mounjaro is taking off in the United States, and that's kind of 25% weight loss versus 15 to 18 for the Ozempic. So it's significantly better.
Yeah.
And actually, in the last kind of results, Ozempic sales went down, even though GLP-1s are taking off. And that gap was captured by Mounjaro. So that's another example.
Is Novo.
Novo
Nordisk. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
So I guess the question is, for Pfizer, they were sixth to market and they captured that market. I don't think we've got 6 different pharmaceutical companies in this space yet. There's a number in clinical trials. How do you assess the options? And, as an investor in this space, how do you try and make a determination about who's going to win?
Yeah, I think the question is what's going to work? It's going to come down to weight loss and side effects, and then the method of delivery.
So just on that, all those 3 factors are quality of the drug itself. So that's really what wins. It's not like size of marketing team or sales and distribution network. It is, at the end of the day, drug quality wins.
Correct. You'll have to get doctors, and the people with the best results will be able to market it. And I think also there's a retention piece. So I'm sure you'll find out that if there's like a daily pill that you take, people stay on it much longer and the market's much bigger than, if you have to inject yourself once a week.
Yeah, okay.
But the interesting ones...
Just because it becomes a habit.
Yeah, it's just easier. Like, people don't like needles ultimately. Like, people get used to them, but if you can take a pill, you do that anyway. But there's actually oral Ozempic on the market, right? It's just not widely available. You have to take it every day, and you have to take large amounts of it. So Novo's not pushing it as hard as they could, because I prefer to keep the supplies for more injections and sell them that way. You can get oral Ozempic today.
Wow.
Yeah.
You've got a science background. What are your actual thoughts on the studies that are coming out of the GLP-1? Like, is it...
They've been good. I mean, there was a select trial for Ozempic but this has been studied for a long time. This has been around for decades. There's been 10-year studies on GLP-1 drugs. This has been one of the most scrutinized things. And there was some early concerns, but basically they kind of stuffed rodents with this stuff, as much as you can give them. And then there were a couple of thyroid issues, but none of those effects have been seen in the broader studies, and like the meta studies where you kind of conglomerate all the different studies and see if there's an effect. Actually, it's been almost universal that the effects are extremely positive for health. There was a study that reduced heart attacks by 26%, and that was in 17,000 people. Expensive, difficult trial to do. It decreases liver fat. It's good for kidney disease. There was just a release from Eli Lilly that improves sleep apnea, 60 or 70% less events in a night just by losing weight. The data's been good. And actually, my favorite one was the original trials. They did the trial twice. Basically, they randomized everybody, gave some people Ozempic and some people not, which was interesting. There's people on it, lost 15, 16%. Then they took those same groups and re-randomized them again and then gave them Ozempic. So then you saw the people that were on it and weren't on it regained the weight. The people that weren't on it and then were on it lost the weight. So it's like, not only did they have 2 trials and 2 placebo arms, they then mixed it all up again. And so in the same person, they could see whether the drug worked. So you're kind of like your own placebo. It's like, these are big studies. Everyone was so scrutinizing. The medical establishment broadly against this kind of approach. There's a big question as whether obesity is even a disease. It was very hard to do this. These have been the most scrutinized drugs, that I can think of.
The fascinating thing out of that is that the people that were on it and then were on the placebo in the second trial, they regained the weight. And for me, that's part of, as an investor, that's part of the bull case, because it means that people are going to need it forever. As a person, it's kind of sad that it's like, you're going to need this forever to keep the weight off. Is that kind of what we're seeing in the studies?
It's pretty accurate. I don't think... There's some pretty interesting stuff coming out, but I think everything is going to be... So far, everything in the pipeline is like that. There's no one and done. Yeah, it's going to be something that you take.
Pharmaceuticals don't want a one and
No.
Yeah, we remember a few years ago.
You treat the symptoms, you don't cure it. Isn't that the play?
Yeah, I mean, remember a few years ago, one and done was the rage. That was all the gene therapies. You get one treatment.
True.
But that just hasn't played out. I mean, if you look at those companies that are all red hot, like CRISPR, Intellia, Editas, they were like some of the host stocks in the market. How many drugs have come out of those?
Yeah, you don't hear much about that anymore.
Yeah, the whole idea was that this would be a whole pipeline of drugs and going to cure all these diseases. I think CRISPR got one approved, and there's like a handful of patients on it now. But it's just taken so long. It hasn't actually achieved what everybody thought it would.
So we could talk GLP-1 drugs all day, but we are talking about Eli Lilly. And I guess when you're closing out the bull case, is there anything else that you would want to put on that side of the ledger? Like anything that you think is exciting? You mentioned Alzheimer's, or is it just like overall market growth in medical spending that could be part of the bull case? Is there anything else that goes to it?
Look, I think they're probably winning in the pipeline. Again, this is GLP-1. So they've got the triple agonist. They've got what looks like probably the best oral drug coming up. And look, it's going to be an acquisition-driven company as well. So they're going to be buying a lot. So the Eli Lilly, in 5 years' time, will look pretty different to it is today. I've got a breast cancer drug coming out. But I think that stuff is all... I don't think there's a huge amount of alpha in that. I think it's particularly in those markets, they're much more predictable in terms of what will be taken up and what won't. And Big Pharma generally does the trials well. They'll do like 2 phase 3s. They'll bring the key opinion leaders along with them. I think those drugs will work as expected and capture the market share people expect. The acquisition strategy of Eli Lilly is going to be fascinating because there's so much money going into that company and Novo. It's what they do with it. And they'll probably end up, if there's a leading candidate, I'm sure they'll have to buy it. There'll be a bidding war between them.
Oh, you mean a leading candidate in the GLP-1 space?
In the
They'll
GLP-1
try and
space.
buy up their
Scoop it
competition.
up.
Yeah, because I want to, and again, they'll have the sales team, they'll have the distribution, they'll have it all ready to go.
Yeah.
So they'll probably have an advantage on, somebody else coming in and trying to do it and build all that from scratch. But it's mission critical for both of those companies. Like if they lost their lead in GLP-1s, that would be the bear case.
Yeah.
Because right now, a lot is priced in.
Yeah.
Certainly I really think you can take to the bank the success of GLP-1s as a category. I don't think that's like a particularly outrageous statement. I firmly believe that 5 mil probably does go to 30, 40, 50 plus.
Yeah. And that's just in the States.
That's just in the States, yeah.
Globally, it's going to be.
But I was sort of saying, I think with Norway, 7% of the population took it after 2 months or something. Like in Scandinavian companies, this stuff was developed.
Yeah.
The uptake was immense.
Yeah.
But in Australia, it's something like 0.7 are on it today.
Yeah,
Wow.
okay.
So it's very under-penetrated here.
Yeah.
And it actually hasn't even been approved for weight loss. The Ozempic and Mounjaro are not approved for weight loss. So everything's off-label. And that's another weird question. Like, why is the TGA in Australia not approved these drugs when there's literally like heart disease, kidney disease, sleep apnea,
Yeah.
Have
liver
they said
disease?
why?
Something I'd have to look into.
Nice.
I do know the doctors are generally against it. Like if you speak to a GP, they're probably going to try and get you not to, and they always come out with these statements saying, yeah.
So outside of losing the race for the GLP-1, what else forms your bear case when you think about Eli Lilly?
I think it's going to come to a market expectation and valuation thing as well. Like you're paying 40 times earnings or something. And even with the immense growth of GLP-1s and with Lilly's winning, it's still only increased their top line by 27%.
Yeah.
This is a big company with like a lot of other things going on. So it's not some crazy growth story on a top line, like combined perspective. So could you see that multiple contract at some point? I'm sure it will. The question is it now? Is it, in 2 or 3 years' time? Do they start going on an acquisition spree and like toast a lot of the capital, which you see again and again? They can make all this money and then pay up massively for drugs that just don't deliver. Like this kind of growth profile is pretty unique. These companies probably got, to some degree, it's probably unfair to say they got lucky. They're very unlikely to strike gold twice.
Yeah.
So there's a few ways it could go wrong. And I'd say it'd probably be acquisitions, or it would be losing leadership in GLP-1s, or you could just get the multiple slowly drifting from 40 to 20 over time.
Yeah, I mean, they could grow really well, but if that multiple contracts, your share price won't grow.
Yeah. And I don't think you can expect it to, triple in size in the next couple of years. It's not going to have that.
Yeah, well, Bryce does, but reasonable people wouldn't. One other part of the bear case that I'm interested to get your thoughts on is the government intervention, especially in the States. Like the $35 insulin has affected Eli Lilly because they're a big, provider of these diabetes drugs and insulin. And there's obviously moves around trying to regulate healthcare costs and pharmaceuticals costs. Never really seems to go anywhere, but there's certainly interest in that space in the States. When you think of like a giant like Eli Lilly, do you think about the government side of it as well?
Definitely. I mean, you can see in Australia versus other parts of the world the difference between supported regulators and not supported regulators. I think people are willing to pay. I think the verdict is that it's worth paying for. But you got to remember, these are drugs as well, so they have patent life. So both Ozempic and Mounjaro will run out of patent life. And I think for Ozempic it's as soon as 2031. So that's, what is that, 6-7 years away from now.
Yeah. Geez, patents are pretty short. How long do you get normally?
It can be 15 years, you can extend it.
Okay.
Depends if you get orphan drug designation.
It's not like Disney's IP where they get it for 75 years.
Yeah, it's nothing like that. It's not like normal business. You really have to take that into account. So actually, it's worth noting for the bear case. So in less than a decade, there will be dirt cheap generic Ozempic that anybody can get.
Oh, how good will that be? I'll be all over that.
So even though Mounjaro is going to last, it could be a point where everyone's like, you know what, just take the free Ozempic. It does the job. It's off patent. You can get it for almost nothing. And it's just a peptide, right? There's nothing. It's not a fancy thing. In Australia, there's pharmacies compounding it away merrily.
Yeah. That's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, Michael, to close out, what do you think Eli Lilly looks like in 10 years? When you model this out, what's the extent with how big can this get?
It's a good question. Because in 10 years' time, think about it, in 10 years' time, they're going to make a lot of acquisitions. All these drugs in the pipeline will have completed their trials. You'll probably have a once monthly injection. You'll have a daily pill. You'll have a triple agonist, a double agonist. It's really hard to say. But my guess is that Eli Lilly probably, their pipeline now looks like it's winning. They're going to have the most money to buy anybody out. So I think you could get, 2 to 3x out of this. But that's not necessarily the best return over 10 years either.
Yeah.
Actually, the 10-year question is super difficult. Because that's when you have generic Ozempic as well.
All patents will be off. So we'll be talking about a whole other class of drugs.
Yeah, Mounjaro will be almost off patent then.
Yeah.
It's going to look completely different to what it looks today.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for coming back on Equity Mates. We really appreciate it. It's been an absolute pleasure. Definitely one to watch. This is one that's exciting a lot of people in the Equity Mates community. And appreciate your time as always.
Great. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Equity Mates.
I will say this about investing. Everything you do learn is cumulative. What I learned at 20 is useful.